What you are about to find out today will permanently change the way you read the most famous story in history. Most people think the Prodigal Son is a gentle story about a father's love. They're wrong. It was a race to stop a public execution. While the son was walking home rehearsing a speech, the village was gathering stones. They weren't preparing a hug, they were preparing the Kezazah, a brutal, legal ceremony designed to erase his identity forever. They didn't want him back, they wanted him gone. Today, we uncover the hidden history of the village gate, the scandalous reason the father had to run, and the ceremony the village tried to hide. If you've ever felt like you've gone too far to come back, you need to see what actually happened when that jar was raised at the gate. But to understand the rescue, you have to understand the collapse. You are standing in the far country, and for the first time, the silence is deafening. The music has stopped. The friends who drank your wealth vanished the moment it ran out. The only sound left is the rhythmic grunting of pigs, animals that, by everything you were raised to believe, are the very definition of uncleanness. You haven't simply lost your money. You have lost your soul's address. You are a son who once told his father, in effect, drop dead, because that is what it meant to demand an inheritance while he was still breathing. And now, you are a beggar, hungry enough to envy what the pigs are eating. This is not unfortunate. This is a total, irreversible collapse of identity. And if you think the walk home is simply a long, humbling road toward a difficult conversation, you do not yet understand the danger. This is the ceremony at the gate. Let's head to the far country. A man had 2 sons. The younger came to his father and said, "Father, give me the share of the estate that is coming to me." In the culture of the first century, this request was not simply premature. It was a declaration. An inheritance was given at death. To demand it while the father still lived was to say, in terms every person in that culture would immediately understand, "I wish you were already gone. I want what comes from your death, without the inconvenience of waiting for you to die." The father, in one of the most startling decisions in all of Scripture, gave it to him. He divided the estate. He let him go. Not because the insult meant nothing, it meant everything. But because love that cannot be refused is not love. It is possession. And this father was never a possessor. Not many days later, the younger son gathered everything and left for a far country. He was not looking for ruin. No one goes looking for ruin. He was looking for his version of heaven, pleasure without consequence, freedom without accountability, a life defined entirely by what he could acquire and consume. Scripture calls it reckless living. The word underneath that translation carries the idea of a life poured out, spent without restraint, in pursuit of something that promised satisfaction and never once delivered it. He was not seeking sin for its own sake. He was seeking heaven in the wrong country, searching for the very thing every human heart is built to want, and looking for it in exactly the place it could never be found. When he had spent everything, a severe famine arose, and he began to be in need. He hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. For a Jewish son, raised inside a framework where the pig was the definitive symbol of everything unclean, this was not simply humiliating work. It was the total, visible collapse of every category that had once defined him. He was so hungry he longed to fill his stomach with the pods the pigs were eating. No one gave him anything. He had traded a crown for a pig trough. And it is precisely here, at the absolute bottom of everything, that the most important sentence in this entire story is about to be spoken. When he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.'" The phrase Luke chooses here, "he came to himself," carries more weight than a simple change of mind. In the language of the original text, it describes something closer to waking from a kind of madness than arriving at a new opinion. The far country had not simply cost him money. It had cost him his own mind, his own clarity, his own grip on who he actually was. He was not merely wrong out there. He was, in a real sense, not himself. He was not planning a homecoming. He was drafting a servant's contract. He had calculated, with as much precision as his desperation allowed, the absolute minimum he could reasonably hope to receive. Not restoration. Not a robe. Not a seat at any table. Simply survival, at the lowest possible rung of the household he had once stood to inherit. He rose and went to his father. And on that road, he had no way of knowing what was actually waiting for him at the gate. If you walk back into that village carrying the reputation this son carried, you are not walking toward an embrace. You are walking toward a legal execution of shame, a ceremony with a name, a script, and a very specific object. Bible scholars have long pointed to a Jewish communal practice some call the Kezazah, the cutting off, as the kind of reception a son in this position might have faced. The precise details of that practice are debated among scholars, and it is not the point of what Jesus is teaching here. But the broader reality it points to is not debated at all. First-century honor and shame culture was severe, public, and unforgiving toward a son who had done what this son had done. Whatever exact form it took, disgrace of this kind was not a private matter. It was communal, and it was procedural. As it has often been described, villagers in a practice like this would gather at the edge of the village, break a clay jar in front of the returning son, and declare him cut off from his people. Whether this exact ceremony was performed in exactly this form is a question historians continue to weigh carefully. What is not in question is the weight of what a young Jewish man in his position would have expected. No one would speak to him. No one would trade with him. No one would acknowledge that he existed. His plan to return quietly as a hired servant was never a realistic hope. He was not simply hungry. He was walking toward the very real possibility of total, communal rejection. This is the dread hanging over every step of his journey home. Not disappointment. Not a difficult conversation. The very real fear of a death sentence for his identity, waiting for him at the gate. At the entrance to the village, as was the custom of that day, the elders and leading men of the town gathered at the city gate. This was where business was conducted, disputes were settled, and the affairs of daily life were discussed among the men who carried authority in the community. The father was among them. And so, quite possibly, was a village already primed for what everyone assumed was coming. The whole town knew this son. They knew what he had done, demanding his inheritance as though his father were already dead, then vanishing into the world in search of pleasures that Scripture calls unrighteous living. Whatever formal shape their response might have taken, there is little reason to think it would have been warm. This was the world the father was sitting in. Business as usual on the surface. A ceremony of judgment, prepared and waiting, just beneath it. And then, in the middle of the ordinary business of the day, the father rose. Something on the hills beyond the village had caught his eye, a lone figure, still some distance off, indistinct to anyone who was not looking for him specifically. But the father was looking. He had been looking, every day, for longer than anyone around him likely realized. And the moment his eyes found that distant, ragged shape on the road, he knew. Luke records it in words that carry the full weight of everything that came before, but while he was still a great way off, his father saw him. Read that again. While he was still a great way off. Not when he reached the gate. Not when the elders could confirm his identity. Not when the village had time to gather the jar. The father saw him first, before the Kezazah ceremony could begin, before the sentence could be carried out, while there was still enough distance on that road for everything to change. The other men at the gate would have followed his gaze. They would have recognized, in that same instant, exactly who was walking toward them, and exactly what the custom of their community required them to do when he arrived. The father had one advantage they did not. He had seen his son first, and he intended to reach him before anyone else could. He felt compassion, and he ran. The verb Luke chooses here is deliberate and singular, a single, decisive, completed action, not a gradual walk that quickened into a jog. In the culture of that world, a man of the father's standing did not run. Running required gathering up the robes, exposing the legs, abandoning every marker of dignity that a patriarch was expected to maintain in public. It was considered beneath a man of his position, undignified, almost scandalous. The father did not care. He abandoned his dignity in front of the very elders, who had gathered to enforce the community's judgment, because he understood something they had not yet calculated. This was a race, and he intended to win it. Some fathers wait for the apology. Some fathers wait for proof of change. Some fathers wait to see if the shame has been sufficiently felt before they extend anything resembling welcome. This father did not wait for any of it. He ran. He was racing the village. That is the detail that changes everything about how this moment should be understood. If the elders reached the son first, if the community's representatives arrived at that gate before the father did, the Kezazah would proceed exactly as custom demanded. The jar would be smashed. The declaration would be made. And no amount of paternal affection offered afterward could undo a ceremony that had already been performed in front of the entire village. The father knew this, and so his run was not simply an emotional outpouring. It was a legal intervention. He was placing his own body between his son and the judgment of the community, positioning himself to reach the boy first, so that whatever happened next would happen on his terms, not the village's. He fell on his son's neck. He kissed him. Before a single word of the rehearsed servant's speech had been spoken, before the confession was complete, before anyone else could reach them, the son began his speech. "Father, I have sinned against heaven, and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." He did not get to finish it. The father was already speaking, not to his son, but to his servants. "Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate." Consider what the robe was actually doing in that moment. The son arrived covered in the visible, physical evidence of everything he had done, the smell of the pigpen still on him, his clothing ragged, every mark of the far country still on his body for the entire village to see. The best robe, placed on him immediately, publicly, before the elders who had gathered expecting a very different ceremony, covered that evidence before a single accusation could be raised. This was not sentiment. This was a legal shield. By embracing his son while he still carried the visible marks of his shame, and by clothing him instantly in the household's finest garment, the father was declaring, in language every person at that gate would understand, "If you intend to bring judgment against him, you will have to bring it against me first. I have already covered what you came to expose." The jar was never smashed. There was no Kezazah ceremony left to perform. The father had already won the race, and in winning it, he had made his son's shame legally, publicly, permanently his own to bear instead. Now the elder son was in the field. And as he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. He was told his brother had returned, and that the father had killed the fattened calf. And he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and pleaded with him, and the son's answer revealed a condition every bit as far from the father's heart as anything his younger brother had done. "Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me even a young goat to celebrate with my friends." He had never left the household, and he was every bit as lost as the son who had. Because the elder brother had built his entire relationship with his father on moral performance rather than love, obeying not because he treasured the father, but because he expected the fatted calf as payment for his compliance. He was, in his own mind, a hired servant all along, exactly the position his younger brother had once tried to negotiate for himself in the pigpen. You can be found by the law and still be entirely lost to the father. That is what the elder son proves. Standing outside the party his own obedience was supposed to have earned him. Here is what makes the elder brother's condition so much more dangerous than his younger brother's. Dangerous not because it is worse, but because it is invisible, even to the one living inside it. The younger son's distance from his father was loud. It announced itself in a pigpen, in an empty stomach, in the humiliating clarity of a man who had run out of every resource and every excuse. He knew exactly what he was and exactly how far he had gone. His condition felt like sin, because it was impossible to mistake it for anything else. The elder son's distance never announced itself at all. He had never left the house. He had obeyed every instruction. He had built a record that, by every external measure available to him, looked like faithfulness. And that is precisely what made it so difficult for him to recognize. His heart was every bit as far from his father's heart as his brother's had ever been, and it was hiding behind a lifetime of technically correct behavior. This is the actual reason Jesus told this story. Not primarily for the tax collectors and sinners drawing near to listen, though it was for them too. He told it because the Pharisees and scribes standing at the edges of the crowd were grumbling that he welcomed sinners and ate with them. They could not see their own distance, because their distance did not look like a pig pen. It looked like righteousness. Consider the shape of your own life for a moment. Rebellion announces itself. It is loud, and it is humiliating, and eventually it forces a reckoning, because it cannot hide from itself indefinitely. But resentment toward grace, the quiet offense taken when someone else receives mercy you believe they have not earned, the calculation of what you are owed for your years of compliance, that can live inside a person for decades without ever being named, because it wears the clothing of virtue. 2 sons. 2 forms of lostness. Only one of them ever smelled the pig pen. Only one of them ever had the mercy of knowing exactly how far he had gone. The danger in this story was never imagined. The Kezazah was real. The jar was in the village's hand, and the father outran the law. Your security today does not depend on how thoroughly you have cleaned yourself of the pig pen's scent, or how faithfully you have labored in the field like the elder brother, hoping your obedience might finally be enough. It depends entirely on whether the Father has already run to intercept the judgment that was coming for you. The robe is already on your back. The ring is already on your finger. And the ceremony that was prepared to cut you off has been cancelled, not because the case against you was weak, but because someone reached the gate before your accusers could, and placed his own body between you and what was coming. Stop negotiating the terms of your return. Stop rehearsing the speech, calculating the minimum you might be permitted to receive. The Father has already won the race. And if you have never left the house at all, if your distance has worn the quiet clothing of obedience rather than the loud clothing of rebellion, the same Father is standing outside the party right now, pleading with you the same way he pled with the elder son. The door has not closed on you either. It never does. Whether you are in the muck of the pig pen or the misery of your own moral performance, the Father is already moving, spending his dignity, spending his glory, entering into the shame he never earned so that it might never reach you. The far country was never just a place. It was a condition of death. And it turns out there were 2 ways to be far from home, one loud, one silent, and only one of them ever felt like sin from the inside. If you feel today the weight of a past you cannot undo, remember that the Father does not wait for the speech to be finished, and he does not wait for the village to render its verdict first. He is already running. He has already seen you, while you were still a great way off, and he is already closing the distance. And if instead you feel the quieter ache of resentment, the sense that grace has been given too easily to someone who did not earn it the way you did, hear the same invitation extended to the elder son standing outside the feast. The Father is pleading with you too. Come in. The party was always meant to include you. I invite you to subscribe and join us as we journey together through the pages of Scripture, discovering not only what happened, but why it still matters today. You are not being tolerated at the edge of the party. You are being celebrated at the center of it. The robe is already in his hand. Step into the house. The fattened calf was killed for exactly this moment, and for you. Thank you for listening, and until next time, may the good Lord bless you and keep you. Shalom.